Deep Sea Embers Chapter 221 to 230. Chapter 221 Inches Reunion. The familiar house stood silently at the end of the quiet neighborhood, the bright and warm lights shining through from the windows when Heidi peered ahead. It's already dark outside, and only the street lights now brought light to the city. The doctor didn't know what awaited her at home, but she knew it's not possible to keep avoiding the issue. Slowing her vehicle down, the lady takes in a deep breath before continuing forward. The scene of saying goodbye to her father still lingered in her head as if it only happened moments ago. Back then, her father had obviously noticed something terribly wrong with the city, and him sending her was his form of protection. Father told me to seek refuge in the cathedral, yet he went to that antique shop in the lower city. Why? A wisp of doubt suddenly appeared in Heidi's mind but quickly subdued this thought for the time being. The light in the foyer of her home was on, and it's beckoning her to go in. She drove the dark gray car smoothly into the courtyard and stepped out of the vehicle. To her surprise and astonishment, what awaited Heidi inside wasn't Morris, her father, but her mother at the dining hall. The old lady wore a woolen shawl with dark blue stripes and sat in a chair with a backrest. She also wore a delicate brown-rimmed glass that gave the senior a rather scholarly look while she read the pile of newspapers stacked atop of the table. Heidi froze at the door, unable to comprehend the picture for a while. The doc couldn't remember the last time her mother left the bedroom. Of course, they always kept an empty seat at the dining table just in case, but no one ever sat on it. Naturally, Heidi found it strange why her mother wouldn't come out, but after so many years, she's gotten used to her mother's condition and habits, yet now, she's finally able to witness her mother sitting in that perennially empty chair. It's almost surreal. Heidi subconsciously took a couple of steps forward, and the sound of her feet finally caught the attention of the old woman at the table. "Ah, Heidi, you're back." The old lady smiles and beckons greets her daughter with a wave. Ads by PubFuture. Heidi wanted to say something and discovered she's unable to come up with a proper greeting. Despite going to her parents' room daily to converse, this was the first time they had done so outside the bedroom. The last occasion happened more than 10 years ago. "I got held at the main cathedral. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, I'm right here," her mother answered happily. Those eyes now gave a sense of energy that Heidi never saw in them before, which showed in the form of the old lady getting up from the chair and slowly coming over. "Let me take a good look at you. I haven't taken a proper look at you in a long time." "Don't we see each other every day?" Heidi said subconsciously, only to realize her mother looked worried while caressing her hair. "How come you came out to the dining room? Are you feeling better today?" Her mother's smile deepened some more. It's okay now. By the way, why hasn't Morris come back yet?" "Father hasn't come home yet." Heidi was shocked when she heard this, causing a faint pang of worry to sprout inside. "He should have arrived home earlier than me. The place he went to isn't as far as the Grand Cathedral." "Maybe his car broke down partway," her mother said slowly, "and his driving skills have never been worthy of a compliment. Come, let's wait for him together." Heidi nodded hesitantly and followed her mother back to the table. Then she noticed the sumptuous meals on the table. They were not the usual dishes made by the temporary maids hired at home. "You did this?" Heidi looked up, slightly surprised. "You haven't cooked in a long time." "Oh, you noticed. I haven't cooked for a long time, so I had to ask the maids for help a lot. There're many ingredients that I didn't know where. Maybe the taste will be a bit off because of that." Her mother faintly smiles. "Fortunately, I remember the general process." Heidi eyed the food on the table and couldn't resist picking up a fork to try. However, her mother's familiar voice stopped her. "Wait for your father to come home and then we can eat." I haven't heard those words for many years. Then, catching the doc off guard, a faint flapping sound of wings suddenly came from outside, followed by the sound of a key turning. "Father is back." Ads by PubFuture. Morris unlocked the door to his own with a dazed appearance. The aftereffects of traveling with eyes teleportation was no joke. It's both nauseating and dizzying. Nevertheless, he eventually managed to come out of it and saw his wife and daughter sitting at the dining table, the dinner prepared and set. It finally dawned on the old scholar this was no illusion but a miracle that became a reality after years of waiting. After standing like a sculpture for who knows how long, Morris finally stepped forward, walking faster and faster with each stride. The shock of sharing a meal with the owner of the vanished paled in comparison to finding his wife alive and well. The burden of making a wish years ago has left him, and now, he could finally enjoy life again. Likewise, Morris's wife rose from the table, allowing the couple to share a long overdue hug. "I finally get to see you," the old scholars whispered, seemingly afraid Heidi would overhear his words. Okay, that's enough. Our daughter is watching. You still have a lot of time to explain what happened. Don't rush it. Oh, you're right. Morris responded with some panic. He let go of his wife, turned his head around, and saw Heidi staring right at him with surprise. Ahem, I'm sorry I came back late. The car broke down on the way, I needed to find someone to tow it back tomorrow, Morris explained unnaturally and then quickly changed the subject. Are you alright? Over at the cathedral side, is everything fine? Except for being frightened and confused, I'm just as unscathed as everyone else, Heidi replied, inspecting her father up and down. But you, why do I feel like you're acting weird? Did something happen on the way back? What can be wrong with me? Morris said immediately, afraid Heidi would lead the topic to his past arrangement. Then he noticed the hearty meal on the table, causing the old scholar's face to turn troubled. I've already eaten before coming back, he said hesitantly, on the I ate at Mr. Duncan's place. Ads by PubFuture. Once again, those ugly and scary fish came to his mind again. At the subspace feast, he was as nervous about the fish as the eccentric dark hound, but under the gaze of Mr. Duncan, he still ate the meat. As to what exactly happened next, he honestly couldn't remember. The only aspect that remained was how fragrant it smelled and tasted. But his wife's voice came from the side, interrupting his thoughts. I made it myself. Mother hasn't cooked in years, Heidi followed, she feels better today, so. Then I'll eat some more. When Morris said in a hurry after hearing the detail. Then not waiting for his daughter to guide him, he dived right in with the soup bowl as a starter. November LBJNN. How does it taste? The wife asked expectantly. Sort of salty, Morris said hesitantly, but then picked up the bowl again and took a few more gulps. Salty, too salty, you always made it salty. If you don't want to eat then don't eat it. I didn't say it didn't taste good. Then shut up and eat. Why are you talking so much at the table? Heidi glanced back and forth between her parents. She hadn't heard a conversation like this in years. Yet, after so long, nothing seemed to have changed. So, the doc burst out laughing and cut off a piece of fried meat for herself. Indeed, it's a bit salty. When Vanna was finally home, she didn't need to act like the strong and powerful leader that she was, therefore, her woes about the subspace blessing didn't go unnoticed by Admin Dante during their conversation. However, the man was keen enough to avoid the subject as well, just like how the powerful lady didn't want to touch the subject. But Vanna herself knew that the burden in her heart didn't just revolve around the truth about her own existence being the blessing of subspace. In fact, it had nothing to do with her own life and death. She returned to the bedroom, closed the door, and went to the dresser to take out an ornamented ceremonial dagger from the drawer. This was a sacred relic of the Storm Church and a gift personally blessed and given to her by Bishop Valentine after the baptism. This relic symbolizes the beginning of her faith for Gomona, the storm goddess. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 222 Inches Shaken. As usual, Vanna calmed down and silently recited the sacred passage from the Storm Codex in her heart. Then she took out a half-burned candle inscribed with runes from the drawer and placed it at the side before lighting it. A small bright flame jumped into life on the tip of the wick, and the calming aroma slowly spread around the room with the volatile compound of the oil it's made of. Vanna wasted no time breathing in the smell, allowing the dagger blade to slit a small opening in her hand. The blood soaked into the fine lines inscribed on the dagger due to this, as if absorbed by whatever mystical power this object wielded. There's a brief sting from the gesture, but that's only for a few seconds before the goddess's blessing healed the lady's wound. She stared down at the ritual dagger, not moving an inch. Vanna knew her indecision was silly when performing a ritual, but she wanted to see for herself it was not her illusion that it's working. So, once done and confirmed it's going as planned, she placed the blue-soaked dagger over the flame and allowed it to burn. Please hear, Goddess of the Storm, Gospel of the Deep Sea, Maiden of the Quiet Sea, hear me, your faithful follower needs guidance, N-O-V-E, in .C Om. The flames crackled, and the blood on the dagger suddenly ignited with unsettled sparks, the signal that the channel had established. Using blood as a guide, a saint could create a communication line with the higher realms. In a way, this could even be seen as talking directly to the gods. The gentle battering of the waves sounded in her ears as she expected. Then Vanna felt the air around her becoming moist, followed by a saltiness hitting her nose before the entire scene changed around the room. The familiar bedroom disappeared, and the surroundings turned into an endless body of water. It's faintly glowing from beneath the surface, and hundreds of mysterious light sources continuously swam around like one could imagine a swarm of jellyfish carrying out their life cycle. But that's not what she's here for. Before long, Vanna had noticed the blurry image of a lady coming into existence within the waters. From the initial impression, it looks like a lady in a long white dress with numerous hazy shadows spreading out behind her in multiple directions. Vanna couldn't see past the veiled face, but there was no doubt in her heart that this was the avatar of the storm goddess. It's a small sliver of the Gomona's power, and it's been condensed into human form so a mortal like Vanna could seek an audience during troubled times. Unexpectedly, despite being the one to initiate a ritual to seek help, it was the goddess's avatar who initiated the desire to speak, not verbally, but an urging directly into the mind of the Inquisitor's head. Vanna slightly hesitated before seemingly making up her mind to speak bluntly. I have survived to this day because of subspace. Why did you choose me as a saint and send me your blessings knowing this? Ads by PubFuture. The hazy and blurry avatar did not move, but Vanna did not dare to force a reply. She knows that although what she saw was only a projection, this projection was indeed a direct link to Gomona. Her very question was a risk, an offense to the goddess. Eventually, after an unknown amount of time in this spatial dimension, an idea suddenly entered the Inquisitor's brain, similar to an implant. It makes no difference. It makes no difference. Vanna was stunned. This confusing answer was even more challenging to understand than obscure and broken prophecies given to the faithful. She instinctively felt there should be some other context in this answer, but she failed to understand the information and could not find the next clue. Finally, out of desire and reflex, she asked, "What makes no difference? I don't understand why you would choose someone like me knowing I'm tainted by subspace." However, Vanna's sentence didn't get to finish before the illusions around her started to warp and twist violently, followed closely by a different soft bright light coming up from the depths of the sea. It pulsated like a beating heart, causing the goddess's avatar to weaken to the point of collapse. This new entry pushed the connection between the two out. However, Vanna did catch a few broken words before then. Time is limited, soon, critical. The connection completely broke after the last word. Vanna found herself rudely thrown back to the real world, heart pounding and breathing suffocating as she convulsed for air. She looked around, finding the illusions gone with the dagger she assumed was still in her hand gone, dropped to the floor without her knowledge. The only undisturbed thing was the ruined candle still quietly burning at the table, the flames beating restlessly. After an unknown amount of time, Vanna's gaze finally withdrew from the candle flame, and she picked up the dropped dagger and slowly put it back in the drawer. Her mind was swirling with the only information that had entered her mind during that brief exchange. There is no difference, and time is limited, about to hit critical. She still couldn't understand what the former meant. As for the latter, it had a clearer meaning, but what exactly was about to hit critical, that's still out of her grasp. Is the goddess telling me that something major is about to happen? Are you warning me that I have limited time to prepare for something important? What does critical mean? What's critical? Another crisis? Another reality invasion level disaster? Is it related to the crisis that Plan just lived through? This prayer did not calm Vanna's mood and caused her to become even more unsettled than during the day. Ads by PubFuture. But suddenly, a strange color appeared in the afterglow of the corner of her eye, making her chaotic thoughts stop instantly. The flame jumping on the ruined candle had turned green at some point. In the next second, she jerked, looked up at her dresser's oval mirror, and met eye to eye with Captain Duncan. "Are you all right?" the gloomy and majestic figure spoke and inquired. "It's you." Vanna jumped and distanced herself from the mirror. "You disrupted my ritual just now." "Ritual? I think you misunderstood." Duncan shook his head. "I suddenly sensed your aura growing extremely chaotic. That's why I came to check on the situation. I might have missed some enemy hidden in the city without realizing it. It seems have been reckless to come unannounced. Sensing my aura, that's why he came to check." Question marks popped up over Vanna's head due to her doubt regarding the answer and the meaning behind certain words. If she didn't know better, the lady might have assumed the ghostly captain was actually a pervert and stalking her in bed. "Don't worry, you're still in the real world," Duncan said casually, "so I strongly recommend that you don't jump chop me like the last time. You're really going to make a mess of your room." "I'm not a brute who only knows how to jump." Vanna suddenly found communicating with this ghost captain was really tiring. The other party's words and deeds would always exceed the records in the archives, and whenever he appeared, it would always catch her off guard like now. It's becoming exhausting. What else are you planning besides coming to check? I thought, you've left completely. Duncan in the mirror frowned as if a little troubled by the overly wary and hostile attitude of the young inquisitor in front of him. You can relax a little, preferably a little more polite too. I have indeed left, but the distance in time and space does not mean much to me. Besides, I just protected your city-state. Don't you think you should at least say thank you? Vanna stared intently at the ghost captain, and after a few seconds of deliberation, she suddenly took a step forward and actually lowered her head. Thank you very much for your help. At least in this matter, Plant owes you a huge debt. This blunt thank you exceeded Duncan's expectations. He thought this girl's brain would be as solid as her muscles, but she's apparently more than just bronze. It's fine, no need to be so serious. I was just mentioning it. We may have different positions, but your act of sheltering Plant cannot be denied. Vanna raised her head with a serious expression. Countless people have survived the disaster today. For that, I must thank you as the Inquisitor out of duty. She paused and then spoke with a straight face, but this does not mean I have relaxed my guard against you and the vanished. We still can't determine what your purpose is for the civilized world, at least until I confirm this. I'm all. Okay, I see what you mean, Duncan interrupted Vanna, who smiled at the young Inquisitor like an amused senior. The other party's words and attitude were far from polite, but this kind of overly straight personality was also not dislikable. Then let's speak about something else. You seem to be in trouble. Vanna met Duncan's gaze and took a few seconds before taking a small breath. Sorry, it has nothing to do with you. Irrelevant, but I'm curious, Duncan said lightly. Whether you want to admit it or not, you can't dispel the imprint I've left on you. Vanna, I can sense your bad state at the moment. Maybe I can help you. Chapter 223 Inches Enhance Understanding. To be fair, Duncan was being genuinely sincere on this topic. He admired the tough-willed and straightforward Inquisitor, admired her performance in that disaster, and even if he put aside this admiration, he cherished Vanna's existence as his special node. November LBJNN. If there's not a sufficient level of coincidence, placing such a node among the top brass of the church wouldn't be an easy task, let alone forming the most basic level of friendship with them. In addition, Vanna's straightforwardness determined that she wouldn't deny Duncan's merits in sheltering Plant. He couldn't say for certain about others in the church who are wholeheartedly against heretics and the likes. Of course, Duncan's sincerity still remained more or less scary to others on the receiving end, that much he knew. Imagine an unbreakable connection similar to a curse, a subspatial shadow that could invade one's mind at will, a superior being powerful enough to reverse the pollution of history but with an unclear purpose. If it weren't for Vanna's indomitable will, the latter would have had a mental breakdown several times over by now. What exactly do you want? Vanna took a small breath, reluctant to show any form of weakness despite already swaying inwardly. And don't say, make some fries, anymore. I want to hear something serious. Actually, making fries is serious. Duncan looked helpless, and a lot of ketchup if you can. Vanna, isn't it obvious? I'm improving the food situation on my ship. Duncan suddenly bellowed a hearty laugh because none of Vanna's reactions exceeded his expectations. Then he strolled around in the mirror to seek a comfortable spot for sitting. Vanna, what do you think a captain like me usually does on my off time? What you usually do? Vanna blinked in bafflement. Unknowingly, the conversation had shifted from a tense atmosphere to one shared between two friends on an afternoon. I never thought about it. Ads by PubFuture. Yes, you haven't thought about it. Nobody ever thinks about these problems. Who would? I'm the infamous ghost captain that has committed heinous acts of subverting the mortal world, right? Duncan said, spreading his hands helplessly. I have a very, very big ship to take care of, and there are a lot of headaches on that ship. My crew often makes a mess, and every time I look around, they're either running around and causing trouble or giving me a headache. But my biggest problem isn't that, it's my water supply. I'm recently considering installing a boiler aboard. Do you have any recommendations? I don't know much about boilers. Wait, no, this isn't right. Vanna subconsciously cried out, her voice and eyes showing shock and disbelief. Then, for a brief second, she realized how ridiculous the conversation had gotten. Why are you suddenly telling me this? And, are you serious? Duncan adjusted his posture and met the Inquisitor's eyes, his expression serious. Vanna, have you noticed, I am not as scary as you think. The unknown brings fear, and now, you are starting to know more about me. Vanna didn't comment because she struggled to keep up with the captain's rhythm. But after a moment of silence, she slowly exhaled and tried to change the subject. By taking the sun fragment, you have also cleared another hidden danger in the city-state of Planned. I should express my gratitude for this. The corners of Duncan's mouth quivered imperceptibly. There's no need for thanks. I have a hobby of collecting. But what he actually wanted to say was that he just sent the sun fragment back to Planned. Although Nina was initially excited to spend the night on the ship, she soon discovered that she couldn't sleep right without being in her own bed. Naturally, Duncan was afraid that when he said this, the person on the opposite side would do a jump chop. Vanna didn't notice the instantaneous change in the other party's expression. Instead, she just nodded slightly and continued. Now that order in the city-state has gradually been restored, the aftermath of the pollution caused by the Embers has completely subsided. Those cultists who summoned the Black Sun, as they wished, became firewood for their own cause. I hope you are satisfied with this result. Good enough, but they'll pop up sooner or later again anyway, Duncan said casually. Heretical worshippers are the byproduct of evil gods, and as long as those roots are not eliminated, cultists are going to continuously sprout up. Vanna listened thoughtfully to everything Duncan said, causing her expression to grow curious. It sounds like you have a bad relationship with those heretical worshippers. Ads by PubFuture. You want intelligence. Duncan beamed a smirk. I get it. This is a rare opportunity to know how Captain Duncan and the Vanished operated after nearly a century. But it's okay, you can be blunt and ask me. Vanna was a little speechless there, and her expression visibly flustered with embarrassment at being caught. I don't like those cultists, both Suntists and Enders. As for the Annihilators who worship the Nether Lord, I don't have many details, but most should be crazy individuals who annoy me. Duncan spread his hands and shrugged. So, you can directly report this matter to those above you. Just say that the Vanished and the three major cults are enemies, and if conditions permit, Captain Duncan will happily destroy any cultist who appears before him. This information should be useful. Thank you for answering. Vanna hesitated but nodded with a rather heavy note. Is there anything else you want to know? Duncan asked again. Vanna pursed her lips. Of course there were more, but she didn't know if it was the right choice to ask the ghost captain about her faith wavering and the truth about subspace. Ultimately, she abstained from touching the topic of her wavering and focused on questions related to subspace. I'm wondering if subspace will respond to mortal wishes, and at what cost does one need to pay to learn this information? Vanna specifically mentioned the cost at the end because she knew very well how grave the topic truly was. She's not afraid to pay the price. Don't be so nervous because there is no cost. Duncan laughed wildly in the mirror. Unlike what everyone thinks, I'm not familiar with the subject either. Vanna. Why does everyone think I will know a lot about the secrets of subspace? Duncan rubbed his forehead a little helplessly. It's true I've been to that place, but I'm not doing population research in subspace either. Would you know everyone who lives in your neighborhood block? Ads by PubFuture. Vanna nodded. I do. Duncan. Vanna quickly realized her folly and showed a flushed face, this time deeper and redder like a child. Of course, there may be some that I'm less familiar with. I see what you mean. Although I can't answer your question, I can see that this question is related to your current bad state. Duncan resumed his serious voice. Something from subspace is bothering you. Vanna only stared at the ghost captain in the mirror, her face saying it all without words. I mean, besides me, Duncan quickly added. I don't know. Vanna shook her head and opened her mouth again as if she wanted to say something, only to stop at the last second. It's fine. It seems that you still have some concerns. I can understand why. Duncan didn't care and shrugged, but if something in subspace bothers you, you can ask me for help. At least in this area, I can help you. Vanna fell silent, and after nearly 10 seconds, she suddenly broke the silence. Why? You're asking why I'm willing to help you. Duncan's voice sounded from the mirror, still majestic and even a little gloomy to Vanna, but it seemed more gentle and sincere at the moment. Maybe it's because I fought alongside Planned. Vanna, I admire your fortitude and bravery. The figure in the mirror stood up, indicating the ghost captain was ready to leave. This brought a wave of relief to Vanna. She couldn't tell whether she was vigilant and cautious or simply nervous, but the other party's intention to leave lifted a burden off her shoulder. But when Duncan's figure was about to completely dissipate from the mirror, she seemed to remember something else and spoke up. Wait, there is one more thing. Duncan turned his face slightly. In the future, Vanna froze a little, organizing her language again before speaking with a slight hesitation. I mean, if you're still going to show up, in the future, can you not always be so sudden? Duncan didn't respond, his face shrouded in shadows deep within the mirror, leaving the lady unable to make out his expression. After a few seconds, Vanna heard the other person's voice come into her ears. Next time, I will knock on the door. Chapter 224 inches. The captain never left. The figure in the mirror really left without doing anything extraneous, as he said at the beginning. He just came to check on the situation. Vanna stared at the mirror with a vigilant face for a while longer before finally letting herself deflate. Then immediately afterward, she fell into a short period of self-reflection and paranoia. The paranoia was due to her professional habit as the Inquisitor. It's tough for her to trust a person who has been carrying out a century-long string of horror legends. As for self-reflection, that's even simpler. Unlike her usual sharp demeanor regarding the supernatural, she had gradually weakened her vigilance in communication with the infamous ghost captain. This was an undeserved sign of weakness. She didn't like it since it shouldn't be happening to her. At the end of it, Vanna could only give herself a slap to get out of this slump. In any case, the city has survived, and she would inform Bishop Valentine about the events of this evening's interaction by tomorrow morning. Also, the part about her own wavering faith. The young Inquisitor sighed, fading into the darkness after extinguishing the light in her bedroom. On the second floor of the antique shop in the lower city, Duncan withdrew his gaze towards the main cathedral and instead shifted it toward the city's night scene. He didn't know what had happened to Vanna, but it was clear that the young Inquisitor's mental state had just experienced a brief and dangerous shakeup. This unstableness even directly alerted his awareness, forcing him to make a projection directly into the real world to see what was happening. Looking back at things now, the aura he felt on Vanna before was faintly familiar. The aura had been hidden in the depths of her spirit. If he would describe it, the sensation would be like the bottom of the vanished, the area where he confronted the weird, chaotic light show in that creepy door. Again, it's the sensation of engaging subspace. Then there's the question Vanna asked him at the end of the conversation, so it's very possible she's being harassed by something related to subspace. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan's fingers unconsciously tapped the windowsill, guessing the truth with the clues he concluded. Unlike before, he had strengthened his imprint on the other party. This force should be able to help the lady resist the erosion that might arise, but the crux of the question was, why did a hint of subspace suddenly appear on Vanna, a high-level saint? Duncan's thoughts began to wander, and he suddenly recalled another detail or knowledge he had learned a while back. Under certain circumstances, the souls of believers in the four gods are more likely to be eroded by subspace than mortals, and their souls will even directly generate a rift connecting the real dimension to subspace. For example, the chapel on the 6th block was a perfect example, where the presiding nun became a catalyst for the evil creatures within the void. Could something similar happen to Vanna? If so, what is behind this counterintuitive phenomenon? After a minute of contemplation, Duncan exhaled and turned away from the window. In any case, he should pay more attention to this special node in the future. Currently, Vanna still lacks trust in him, meaning she wouldn't take the initiative to tell him any of her secrets. Along the way back to his own bedroom, Duncan unexpectedly heard the giggling voices of two young girls coming from the next room over, Nina and Shirley. Despite returning to the city-state from the vanished, they seemed rather excited, especially Nina. The child didn't seem to have suffered any psychological trauma by visiting the eerie ghost ship, nor did she have any apprehension about the future. In fact, Nina was as cheerful as ever to the point it's disturbing. Is it the influence of Sun Fragment? Or is it because she has a strong receptive personality? Duncan mused, discovering some unexpected talent of Nina's. As night fell, the cold, pale glow of the rift that was the world's creation hanging overhead eventually blanketed the vanished deck. Ads by PubFuture. Captain, where are we going next? Alice, in her rush, came barging up to the bridge. There is no destination for now, so let's leave the busy route between the city-states. Duncan glanced down at the doll staring at him with those glowing purple eyes. You seem to be in a good mood. Yes, Alice nodded chirpily. No matter how elegant and noble her appearance was, it's all been destroyed when she's nodding cheerfully like right now. The ship is so lively today. For the first time, I finally know what it's like to spend time with so many people. It's not always fun to bring people together, you know. But it's probably a little harder for you to understand my meaning, Duncan said casually, plus, keep your nodding under control. You freaked the daylights out of them when your head popped off. Ooh, Alice hurriedly held her head, then got a little worried. Then won't you stop coming because of this, right? Not that I'm aware of. Don't worry about it. Alice hummed a nod and then remained quiet for a few seconds before asking again, so, will I be able to go to the city-state in the future? I didn't even get to see the world properly this time. Things got so messy and dizzying. Duncan's gaze swept over the sea before shifting it back to Alice. Of course, tomorrow I can ask I to send you to the antique shop. I still need your help at the store. Really? Alice's eyes visibly lit up with surprise. I thought, we won't return to the city-state for a while. You are finished with the business over there, right? Duncan did not answer the other party immediately. Instead, he kept his mouth shut briefly before replying, so you think I only went over to plan because I have business there? Alice blinks in confusion, scratching the back of her head. I don't know. Duncan shook his head with a faint smile before letting go of the steering wheel. N-O-V-L-B in .c ohm. Ads by PubFuture. There was a slight creak from the Vanished due to this action, and the mast sails tightened a little, signaling the ship had gone into a cruising state, where Goathead took over. We're just solving the trouble made by a bunch of cultists, Duncan said casually to Alice as he stepped down from the helm and walked toward the captain's room. As for planned, I believe that city-state is fated for me. As expected of being the captain, his words are so profound, Alice mutters alone in the rear after being left behind. Eventually, Duncan arrived back at the door of the captain's compartment, where the words, Door of the Lost, were inscribed on the frame as always. Inhaling deeply, he calmed his spirit and pushed it open with a huff. A hazy and distorted mist appeared promptly in front, devouring Duncan's existence as he fell into an empty, weightless space. Then, in the next instant, he was through, back in the familiar and quiet environment of the other world. Zhou Ming opened his eyes and surveyed his bachelor apartment. As usual, the first thing he did when he returned was to confirm the general situation of the entire room. Everything was as he left it. Whether it was the dense fog outside the window or the string of scraps he left around the windowsills had ever been moved. Despite knowing there was no point in doing so, he treated this series of confirmations as some task that had to be done. After Zhou Ming was done, the second thing he did was to come to his desk, where he found a miniature sculpture with an appearance similar to plans sitting quietly in place. Exquisite and restored, every detail was vivid to the eye. In fact, he's pretty sure every floor tile of every street had been perfectly replicated on this model. Or, to put it another way, this was the projection of the real plan presented in another form within his bachelor apartment. It's here, as expected. Zhou Ming exhaled softly, sat down at the table, and examined his newfound exquisite toy. Compared to the model of the Vanished, the size of this city-state was obviously much more extensive but also obviously not scaled in equal proportions. From the initial assessment, it seems to fit into a separate shelf compartment as if it were specially tailored for that spot. And, of course, no shadow of any inhabitants exists in this vivid city-state model. It looks like the people living in the city-state are omitted. Zhou Ming wondered, repeatedly examining the model before picking it up entirely and bringing it over to the shelf with both hands. Once done with putting it away, he took 2 steps back and silently admired his new collection. The Vanished has moved away from planned, but the captain never left his precious city-state. Chapter 225 Inches The Late Sunrise. After putting away his new collection, Zhou Ming did not leave the room directly as usual. Instead, he sat on the chair opposite the shelf and fell into deep thought while staring at the models. He was trying to summarize and understand what these collections represented. For a long time now, this bachelor apartment and the world opposite the door were isolated from one another. Aside from the door itself, only he could pass through the two worlds. In a sense, the models of the Vanished and plan that appeared in the room are equivalent to breaking this rule. They are clearly related to the world opposite the door, and their properties clearly carry supernatural attributes. Supernatural attributes should not be a concept on this side. In addition, the emergence of these two collections had a common rule he could see. They are things that have, at some point, completely burned by the ghost fire and controlled by his own consciousness. Zhou Ming quietly pondered, summing up the rules little by little, and finally, he believed that burning and control should be the two necessary conditions for the emergence of these collections. For example, the original white oak had also been burned by the flames of the Vanished, but he didn't take the initiative to control that ship back then. To be precise, he did not exert any influence or instructions on the white oak, so after the burning, the ship did not form a corresponding model. in the room except for leaving a strong marking. Meanwhile, he had actively controlled and purified the city-state after it had burned, effectively meeting the two requirements of producing a model on this side. So, what use can this transformation provide me? What's the meaning behind these models in this collection? Zhou Ming's gaze fell on plans, model, slightly closing his eyes to perceive what he suspected. Ads by PubFuture. The breeze blowing through the port area in the southeastern parts of the island, the delicate waves battering the beach, and the rumbling noise of the steam factories in the upper city. Then, he reopened his eyes with an understanding light. It's as he theorized. Unlike in the past, he's now able to see and feel everything within the city-state. In essence, this model had given him the authority to control the entire island at will. The same authority as with the Vanished and its properties. Zhou Ming rubbed his chin thoughtfully, realizing what this implied and the possibilities this included. For example, he could order all the bells to ring at will or sink into the sea at a whim. If worse, he could even tell the island to enter the spirit realm. Zhou Ming subconsciously stopped rubbing his chin when his brainstorming reached this point. Reason, he just got another idea, a very terrifying idea. What if I ordered the city-state to sink into subspace? Zhou Ming's eyes locked in place, shuddering at himself for even having such evil thoughts. Make no mistake, he wouldn't actively send an entire city into a plane of existence that's feared even by demons. But what if, let's say he did it by accident? At a whim, a careless remark if he somehow got drunk. A person without control wouldn't know what they're doing. Zhou Ming started to gasp heavily, finding it hard to breathe at the immense authority he suddenly found himself with. Then, with wobbly legs, he slowly stood up from the chair and stared at the two models on his shelf with a look of fear and awe. It's no wonder the world feared the Vanished. How can any single person wield such power? Zhou Ming took one last deep look at his collection, gripped the desk's corner, and swung around. He needed to get away from this suffocating room and calm himself. Back over in the mapping room of the captain's room, Goathead was still controlling the vessel when he overheard the movement from the forbidden door. Creaking its head in that direction, the wooden sculpture saw the familiar figure of Duncan appearing. Ah! The great captain is back for his loyal first mate. Your exploits are known to everyone, and your great power makes the boundless sea. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan did not say anything. Instead, he sat down at the mapping table and silently stared at the poor sculpture. This eerie awkwardness actually managed to shut Goathead up for a bit. However, a blabbermouth will always be a blabbermouth. After a minute of calm, he couldn't resist and asked, Captain, aren't you going to tell me to shut up, like usual? Duncan continued to look indifferent. I suddenly got an idea. How long can you babble for if I don't? Goathead immediately got all energetic when he heard this and ignored the mocking undertone of Duncan's words. Then you've come to the right place. Your loyal first mate is well versed in the various recipes of the boundless sea. I can go from day to night just on this one topic if you like, and if you are interested, I can also classify the 137 butter biscuits. Okay, shut up, Duncan quickly interrupted the other party, shaking his head helplessly. I thought you would at least have the concept of shame. Goathead shook its head, creating a crunching sound around the neck as a result. Its dark face had now completely locked onto Duncan's with those obsidian-bead eyes. Captain, you seem to have something on your mind. We've just accomplished an unprecedented feat. What else can affect your mood? An unprecedented feat, Duncan muttered softly, then shook his head. You can feel it too, right? The connection between planned and the Vanished now. Of course, Goathead immediately replied, not forgetting to tout about the feat. I never thought there would be such a day. Your greatness is astounding, and your hunt this time is an entire city. So what's next? Are we going to Lunsa first or Cold Port? Or Frost is good too? Duncan waved his hand, silencing the wooden sculpture. I'm not interested in hunting, for the time being. I only want to tell you that I don't have the energy to continuously stare at such a large place. If you sense something that shouldn't be in that city, warn me and provide me with the details. Of course, your main job is still to man the ship. Gladly, Goathead immediately said, this is a breeze for me, and I will definitely live up to your expectations. Duncan nodded slightly, then swept his gaze over the wall in the window port. Ads by PubFuture. Before he knew it, the night had passed. After a few seconds, Duncan suddenly jerked around. What time is it? Goathead was startled, unsure of why the captain was acting out. It should be morning. It's time for the sun to rise. The sun hasn't risen yet, Duncan said in a deep voice, his expression unusually serious. Then he turned his head sharply and stared at the ticking clock hanging on the wall. Sunrise should have happened 14 minutes ago. Goathead momentarily fell into silence as Duncan stared daggers at the mechanical device that might have been misaligned without his knowledge. The sun of this world, the Supervision 001, rose and set with a precision unseen in any other object of this world. As far as Duncan knew, this had never changed since he came to this weird and dangerous world. Yet, today's sun did not rise in time. Ordinary people may not have noticed this change, but Duncan definitely did, and this disturbed him. Perhaps, we only need to wait a while, Goathead voiced his opinion then, seemingly apprehensive about the subject. You see, the weather at sea is always elusive. Maybe something had blocked it. Duncan ignored what Goathead was saying. He was still looking at the clock, but in the next second, a subtle golden light appeared at the edge of his field of vision. It was coming through the porthole. He promptly swung around, walked up to the round window, and pushed it open to stare off into the distance. The sun has risen, and the huge light body bound by the double-runed ring gradually rose into the sky as usual, dispelling the cold and pale atmosphere left by the rift during the night. NOVELBJN.C Ohm. Today's sunrise is 15 minutes later than usual. Why? Is it the aftermath of Plan's disaster? Or is it related to the creeping sun wheel? Worse, related to Nina's awakening and control? Duncan returned to the table and grew cranky at whatever was eluding his knowledge. He knew these emotions were uncalled for, but after experiencing the historical pollution of Plan, he couldn't just ignore a sign like this. It's definitely a prelude to something bigger, but what? Maybe it's just the weather at sea. You see, isn't the sun still rising? Goathead chimed in from the side after noticing the poor mood of the captain. Sometimes a wide area of dense fog can refract the light, resulting in. The sun is also 15 minutes late in planned, Duncan interrupted Goathead, but softer in his voice since he knew he was being harsh. It's sunny over there, and the sea is calm. The late part isn't the light, but the sun itself. Damn it. Chapter 226 inches. The wavering faith. Hurried footsteps broke the tranquility in the cathedral. Bishop Valentine, who was assigning affairs to the priests at the side, raised his head and saw Vanna walking over. I thought you would rest at home for 2 more days. The head bishop waved his hand to have the assistants and attendants leave, giving the 2 room to speak. Unfortunately, it seems that I don't have this spare time. Vanna shook her head with a slightly serious expression. What happened? I saw many priests running about, and I heard that a group of ascetic priests was sent into the stargazing well. Does it have anything to do with today's sunrise? Yes, Valentine nodded, his expression looking solemn. Today's sunrise is 15 minutes later than usual, and it was not due to abnormal weather conditions. I received reports from other city-states and sea contacts confirming this fact through the psionic communication channel. Like us, their side also observed the abnormal sunrise. This world has been illuminated by the world creation for 15 more minutes. Vanna frowned slightly. Are there any reports of damage? No, just postponement of dawn is not a problem. 15 minutes of more nighttime is still within the redundant range of the city-state's safety measures, the old bishop said. The real disturbing part is that the same phenomenon is observed worldwide, which shows that the problem is not with the land surface or the sea. The operation of Vision 001 itself has changed. Vanna knew what the old bishop was worried about. Is there no word from the nameless king yet? Valentine shook his head slightly. There is no movement from the tomb, so this may just be a minor change. I'm terrified of is what the people will do when they find out. At the moment, most aren't aware of this fact, and those few that did notice aren't making a fuss yet. Until we can be certain the sun is back to normal, we can't rest. After a minute of thought, Vanna finally asked, so what measures have you taken thus far? Nothing much, aside from informing City Hall and asking them to pen a reassuring notice and guideline for the public when news breaks. We are going to keep monitoring Vision 001. It's not a good idea to issue an overly positive announcement after experiencing a disaster of this magnitude. People will think we're lying and trying to cover up the truth. Vanna silently listened to the old bishop's analysis and didn't interject anything. As an inquisitor who devoted most of her energy to combat missions, she knew she was not a professional in these arrangements. Do you have something on your mind? Valentine asked with a worried face after noticing the lack of energy from the lady. I'm only just a little emotional. Vanna sighed softly and shook her head. Every time there is a great disaster, the more I'm aware of how fragile the world we live in today is. The city-states, the churches, the fleet, everything we are proud of, seem to be built on a thin, fragile layer of ice. Any crack not discovered in time will cause our world to disappear. That's why we're always vigilant and tenacious, Valentine said quietly, staring into the young inquisitor's eyes. Vanna, you rarely speak like this, what happened? Vanna fell silent again, seemingly in turmoil over what to say. There are two things. The first one, I saw Captain Duncan again yesterday. N-O-V-E in .c ohm. Valentine's eyes were initially hard and serious, but they softened as he sighed. Actually, it is expected. He paused, then continued explaining why. We still haven't done anything about the mark that Ghost Captain left on you. Even now, the entire city-state of Plan may have established a connection with that captain. I knew it was just a matter of time before he came to you again. What did he tell you this time? Mostly small talks, Vanna said in a slightly strange tone. Small talks. This time Valentine finally raised his eyebrows due to the unexpected answer. Are you saying that the captain of the Vanished, the shadow who returned from subspace, the Duncan, who reversed the pollution of history and took away the sun fragment, specifically found you just for a chat? I knew you would react this way. I couldn't believe it either. Seriously, I would have believed him if he had told me he planned to conquer the world. But, Vanna heaved a long sigh, and over the next 10 minutes, she went over the conversation she had with Duncan last night. Valentine rubbed his forehead as he listened to Vanna's report. The old bishop, who had never faltered in the face of the doomsday crisis, finally couldn't conceal the exhaustion and distress he felt inside. But after a brief look of confusion, he raised his head and said in a somewhat complicated tone, Vanna, actually, I have been thinking about a problem since last night. What problem? You had 2 direct exchanges with Captain Duncan. In your opinion, that Ghost Captain, does he feel like an invader from subspace? What do you mean? Vanna's face got weird as she grew cautious. It is a definite truth that the Vanished fell into subspace and returned. I'm not denying that fact or questioning it. However, don't you find it odd? In your own opinion, how should a person that has somehow returned from subspace behave? Are they supposed to be sane and able to converse with you like a sensible individual? This time, Vanna hesitated as if unable to give an answer to the posed questions. Judging by past cases and basic knowledge of what subspace does to those people, that's impossible. That's right, normally it's impossible to converse with those lost to subspace. The pollution is too severe and cannot be saved. Bishop Valentine nodded. To us mortals, subspace is deadly poisonous, capable of polluting any blessing or protection provided by the gods. Yet, here we are, a ghost captain that's been to and back from subspace conversing with you. If we apply some simple logic to the matter, perhaps. You mean that Captain Duncan has most likely regained his humanity? Not regained, taken back, Bishop Valentine corrected the lady. In the early records, there are clear reports of the indiscriminate attacks carried out by the Vanished following its sighting. Captain Duncan back then had clearly fallen into madness. Vanna mused over the information, and the more she mused, the more incredulous her expression became. Is this possible? After being completely taken by subspace, one can still retrieve their humanity. How else are we supposed to explain Captain Duncan's current state? That person coming to have a small chat is not some small feat. Bishop Valentine softly interrupted Vanna to remind her about a critical fact. Don't forget about that law of zero. Ads by PubFuture. Vanna made a stunned face, then got it. There will always be anomalies and visions that do not conform to the regular parameters. A long silence fell over this great hall of the cathedral, leaving the 2 high-ranking clerics to mull over their next course of action. Eventually, it was Valentine who broke the air. But we still can't treat the Vanished and its captain as harmless on this basis alone, you understand. In the end, he still went into subspace and came back. Regardless of him taking back his humanity, it's difficult to say he wouldn't suddenly go berserk one day on us mortals. In addition, we can't just make our own judgments on this matter. We must report all this to the Grand Storm Cathedral out at sea. Then, Her Majesty the Pope will decide on what to do next. Vanna's posture straightened to attention as she nodded solemnly in agreement. Of course, I am very clear about this. Then she paused as her expression became a little strange again. You know, it's kind of weird knowing we're discussing this topic within the sacred buildings of the church. If it was in the past, I would probably define myself as a heretic by now. Valentine sighed noncommittally. You just said there are 2 things to report. Besides meeting that ghost captain, what is the second thing? This time, Vanna fell into an even longer silence, seemingly tied inside as to whether or not she should say this part. Eventually, the lady summoned up the courage and gazed at the goddess's statue. I should repent. Repent? Valentine looked at her in surprise. Why are you repenting? I was shaken in my belief. I couldn't stop my wavering. Vanna took a deep breath and confessed dryly, after that fire, I questioned my faith and if I should believe in her. She spoke out about her doubts and blamed the goddess for not doing more to save them. On the other hand, Valentine didn't comment and simply stood there for a good while, which in turn roused an odd look from Vanna. Vanna, if you came to me to repent, then where should I go to repent? A hint of surprise finally appeared in Vanna's eyes. You are one, and I am the second. We're both wavering followers of the faith here. After that confession, the old bishop suddenly got older as if years had been tacked onto his skin. Vanna, can you feel it? Feel what? The goddess is still blessing us. Chapter 227 Inches Faith remains. There are usually 2 points at which a devout waver. The first when questioning their beliefs, and the second when they questioned their faith and the God still blessed them with power. Right now, a densely overlapping static noise had begun to ring within Vanna's mind. Like a distant recorder in disrepair, the Inquisitor no longer accepted the goddess's message without questioning them. For example, the weird words she received during the ritual in her room. She's wondering what they meant at the moment, or were they even words to begin with. The more she thought about it, the more pronounced the static noise in her head became, making it difficult for her to concentrate. Then suddenly, all the noise snapped away, allowing her to escape that trance. Are you okay? The old bishop asked with concern and worry after seeing his peer in a daze. I think so. Vanna tapped her forehead lightly and then looked at the elder with some strangeness. You too. When the last bell rang, I faltered, there is nothing to hide. After all, I do not have the immaculate will of those saints who have been installed in the temple. Valentine shook his head and said calmly to Vanna. I wondered why the pollution and penetration of those Ender managed to reach such an extent, why the shelter of the cathedral still cannot stop the sacrifices of those Suntists, why the goddess has not warned us even once after the crisis spread for more than 10 years. He listed his woes, then turned around and stared quietly at the statue of Gomona. It's as cold and quiet as ever despite the divine glow coming down from the ceiling glass. When I woke up again, I was ashamed. I knew I had made the biggest mistake in the Storm Codex, using the gods' protection as an omnipotent medicine, thus shaking my will. But even so, these doubts still took root within me. November LBJNN. The enemy has infiltrated and broken through the barrier from within. They planned this for many years, making this sneak attack difficult to resist, Vanna calmly countered after a moment of silence. Heresy will always take advantage of an opening, but that does not mean the authority of the goddess can be easily overthrown. I understand this truth, Valentine laughed, that's why I'm still faithful even if I wavered a little. Because the goddess's blessing is still sheltering our world. We know this, and we know their love is real, but, on top of that, I have some extra thoughts. Questioning is heresy, Bishop Valentine, said Vanna with a serious look. But then sighed as if to herself, the same is true for me. Then consider this a test upon us, Valentine said softly. Vanna added nothing more, only stepping over to stare at the statue and praying with her peer. But the tranquility here didn't last for long. A series of footsteps had entered the great hall only minutes later, causing Vanna to look back at the source, finding a middle-aged priest in civilian robes walking over. Ads by PubFuture. Head Bishop, this is the report you wanted. The person quickly handed some sort of document to Valentine. Nodding to give his thanks, the old bishop took the document, and after quickly flipping through a few pages, the expression on his face became visibly weirder. What's that? Vanna grew slightly intrigued and asked, what is written on it? It is an initial investigation of the current events after what happened to the city. The civil department sent it over from City Hall. Valentine frowned after explaining, seemingly unsure of what to make of it. See for yourself. Vanna took the document and warily read the title. Immediately, she understood why her peer would make such a face. The preliminary damage report has all been included in this document. Everything had been reset to the moment before the disaster struck, the only exception being a select few merchants near the docks. There are merchants in the dock area reporting a large number of potatoes and fries have mysteriously disappeared from their stocks. There are also reports of ketchup losses. The young inquisitor raised her head with a wooden expression at Valentine, who also had a wooden expression in return, serious. How about you personally lead the team over and ask? The corners of Valentine's mouth twitched. Theoretically, no one would dare falsify such a report. Vanna held the document in her hand and remained quiet for a good while. Finally, she heaved a long sigh and said, Why did this kind of content appear on such a serious report? Valentine remained unemotional. A whole squadron of guardians have been monitoring the fries at the pier. What is their opinion? Vanna, all in all, the thing mentioned in the report is the only known loss in the city-state thus far. Valentine sighed and then hesitated again before looking into Vanna's eyes. If not, why don't you ask him directly next time you meet? Vanna was stunned. Ask who? You tell me. Vanna. After a while, the young inquisitor finally couldn't help but rub her forehead as a throbbing pain struck. I feel like my thoughts are getting more and more difficult to sort. Are you sure we should be discussing such matters here? Ads by PubFuture. I don't know. At least I can't connect this to anything other than him, Valentine grimaced. Suddenly, another priest had barged in through the front gate, rushing over with a frantic face. Head Bishop, Inquisitor, news from the port area. It's okay. We already know about the fries, so there's no need to report it twice. Vanna quickly shut the guy down, thinking it's a repeat of the document when she heard the word, port. French fries. The priest was a little stunned as he glanced around, unsure of what she meant. What fries? Ah, you're not here to report about the fries. Vanna awkwardly coughed after realizing she had jumped the gun. I thought it was another report about, never mind, please go on. What's the matter with the port area? The priest who came to report nodded and looked serious. There is news from the port area that the sea mist is applying to enter the harbor. Tyrion Abnomar requests contact with the church as soon as possible. He brings news related to the vanished. Vanna immediately burst into an earth-shattering coughing fit, catching the unaware priest by surprise as he jumped back from the sudden movement. Inquisitor, I'm okay. It took Vanna a long while to finally get herself under control. Then, as if to play off her antics, she huffed and puffed up her chest to look imposing and strong in order to hide the embarrassment inside. The sea mist. I know we did send a letter to its owner, but we never got a reply. The sea mist did come, and it seems to have arrived in the surrounding waters before the disaster struck. The priest nodded and explained what he knew. According to the sea mist's message, they encountered the vanished in the eastern waters, where a vicious battle broke out. As a result, they suffered immense damage and requested docking permission for repairs. A battle broke out with the vanished. Try as she might, Vanna instantly lost her composure again and dropped her jaw as she turned to face Valentine. I have to go there myself. Yes, that would be good, Valentine nodded immediately. The sea mist is a special ship after all. Although it belongs to our people, the members of that ship are still likely to cause a stir on the dock. You personally lead the team to greet them. That should keep things calm. Vanna agreed and quickly left the cathedral. The sea mist arrived without incident. Although a little later than expected, the huge warship, shrouded in legendary auras and fearful curses, arrived at the city-state of Planned as promised. Now, the formidable steel warship was slowly approaching the pier for mooring large ships under the instructions of the docking guide. While some people who received the news gathered near the pier to get a closer look at this legendary warship, more were showing nervous glances at the steel behemoth. But soon, the people near the pier realized that the majestic steel warship didn't come with malicious intent but came after a vicious battle. It was scarred, with 3 of the 6 main guns destroyed, the side of the ship dug out with holes, and the bridge damaged up to 2/3 of its body. Under such conditions, most normal ships would have sunk by now since the seeping water would have kept the hull below the waterline. However, the sea mist was no ordinary warship. It was still stubbornly lugging along the sea, and there seemed to be life in its belly, constantly pumping out the seawater through its structure regardless of a pump nearby. Soon enough, the arrival of Vanna and her team with the spiderwalkers silenced the nosy crowd. Chapter 228 Inches The Great Pirate Who Entered the City-State. The steam spider stopped in front of the trestle bridge as Vanna peered out of the machine, staring up at the legendary ship in front of her, also known as the unsinkable battleship. The ship may be difficult to sink, but it was not invincible. Just like everything in this world, the ship could be bruised and battered. It was evident to the naked eye that the sea mist had experienced a vicious battle. Of course, if one recalled the intact state of the vanished when the bell tower rang back then compared it to the current beat-up state of the sea mist, it's not hard to understand how one-sided the battle must have been. Vanna didn't know much about naval warfare, but even she could tell it's a true feat for the steel ship to make it to port. This was also because the sea mist used its powerful, unsinkable, ability to repair itself for an entire day. Recalling the story of the vanished and the cursed connection between herself and Captain Duncan, Vanna could already feel the headache coming. She rubbed her temple and jumped off the spiderwalker, then saw the springboard extending out from the sea mist in the distance. Several figures were already disembarking. At the head was a one-eyed man wearing an imposing captain's uniform. With slightly curly black hair and an eye patch, his face looked similar to Duncan Abnomar. However, compared with the oppressive ghost captain, Captain Tyrion, who was walking towards the trestle at the moment, looked quite tired and haggard. Behind the famous pirate captain were several attendants, their complexions pale and the expressions on their faces stiff like a plastered statue. But overall, they weren't as terrifying as the many thrilling stories made them out to be. Vanna has heard a lot of rumors about the Sea Mist and its crew. Due to its nature as being part of civilization still, the stories were naturally less terrifying compared to the Vanished. And among those rumors, the most mentioned were the undead sailors under Tyrion Abnomar. Legend has it that these sailors were all men taken when Tyrion fled Frostbite during the rebellion. Some of them were even veterans of the Vanished fleet a century earlier. They, like their own captain, had been influenced by subspace. The curse that entrenched the members of the Abnomar family also affected their followers, turning the latter into the immortal living dead. They could not die in the dimension of reality nor enjoy the warmth of the living. All these poor souls could do was wander the world, hoping that Bartok, the god of death, would finally allow them passage to the afterlife one day. NOVELBJN.C Ohm. But that's not the only version. In other rumors, it's mentioned that these undead sailors had no attachment to the earthly world and their former compatriots. The only reason they're still around was due to the powerful oath they swore to the eldest son of the Abnomar family. Vanna stared at the figures, watching them step onto the land of Pland, then turned towards herself under the leadership of Tyrion. Adds by PubFuture. The living dead, by strict definition, are already the subjects of Bartok, the god of death. Bartok belongs to the same camp as the other righteous gods, so these undead sailors are also allowed to set foot on the city-state's land. However, this does not mean ordinary people could accept these creepy, former compatriots, and considering these undead sailors are also inextricably linked to the curse of the Abnomar family, Vanna must always keep a vigilant eye on their movements. It's just that, what differences were there between the current Pland and the Sea Mist's undead crew? Greetings to you, Miss Inquisitor. Tyrion took off his captain's hat and slightly bowed his head as a greeting. He was surprised by Vanna's youthful nature and tall height. Nevertheless, it doesn't hinder his desire to show his manners to the lady. Thank you for personally greeting us. Nice to meet you, Captain Tyrion. Vanna quickly sobered up from her mind-wandering and nodded to the man in front of her, who looked no older than 30 by appearance. Out of reflex, the lady had compared the son to his father, Captain Duncan, and realized the son wasn't as tall nor imposing as the latter. You answered Plan's call for help, and for that alone, we must show our gratitude. But we didn't come in handy after all. Tyrion sighed strangely and subconsciously raised his head to glance around the port as if looking for something. What are you looking for? Vanna could vaguely guess what the other party was doing, so her tone was calm and casual. With all due respect, have you received our message before we docked? Tyrion nervously said while his eyes rolled around the area. We encountered the Vanished on the way. Although we tried our best to intercept it, the ship still. Your father came, Vanna sighed, but he left yesterday. As soon as these words came out, the big pirate opposite of her, Captain Tyrion, immediately stood straight like a stone sculpture. Even the cold and stiff faces of the several attendants behind him trembled slightly as if hearing a horror story. I didn't hear clearly. It took a few seconds for Tyrion to react, looking at the young Inquisitor in front of him with a ghostly expression. Miss Inquisitor, you said that my father was here yesterday. He deliberately emphasized the word, father, as if afraid Vanna would play some joke with him on this fateful issue. The situation is very complicated and will need some explaining. Vanna sighed again. The Vanished has indeed appeared, but it is very different from the situation described in the letter we originally sent you. Pland has just experienced a huge change. Please come with me. Bishop Valentine is already waiting in the cathedral. We need to go over some urgent details, and I presume you also have countless questions that need answering. Feeling that all the plans he had conceived on his way had been disrupted, Tyrion appeared almost confused and dazed when following Vanna's footsteps. Eventually, they were in front of a black steam car with the church's insignia parked on the side of the road, a vehicle specifically prepared for them as the church's guests. To be honest, I thought you would stop me in the pier area, Tyrion said in a self-deprecating tone. Perhaps it's to break the awkward atmosphere or relieve some kind of unprovoked pressure. The dreary captain actually cocked a joke for once due to his inner turmoil. After all, Under normal circumstances, the city-state authorities will reject a pirate to dock or simply prepare a noose for the pirate. Ads by PubFuture. It's not Frost here, and the arrest warrants from the northern city-states do not apply in planned. Well, that is unless you commit something huge and are jointly wanted on the entire boundless sea one day, Vanna said casually, spreading her hands like she didn't care. But until that day comes, you are just a captain who is eager to help Plandon. While speaking, she turned her head and glanced at the sea mist that still exuded a majestic aura even though it was battered and scarred. And seriously, even in the northern seas, who would dare bring a noose to place on your neck? Tyrion thought about it and laughed. When I land, the city-state guards would politely call me the boss of the Sea Mist Ventures and advertise my visit as a business deal between the city-state and the Sea Mist fleet when doubts arose. Did you know that pirates have this proverb about warrants? The small pirate will be unable to sleep when they're wanted, and a big pirate will feel like they're stepping on needles when they see their poster, but a top-level wanted warrant will be used as tablecloths in a pub. The big pirate paused, then spread his hands out helplessly. Except for Frost, I can calmly step on the land of any northern city-state at my leisure. Vanna raised her eyebrows. Except for Frost. Her Majesty Rhaenora ordered me to leave the former Frostbite Kingdom. Tyrion retracted the smile on his face. She never withdrew this order. Vanna glanced at the other party and saw that the expression on the big pirate's face became solemn. As a smart lady, she didn't comment on the subject, knowing there's a history behind the man and that city-state. Instead, she stepped over to the black steam car and opened the passenger door. Please take a seat in the car, Captain Tyrion. After that, she turned around and jumped on a spiderwalker next to the vehicle, leaving the captain and subordinates to enter the vehicle independently. Captain, one of the attendants noticed his boss's behavior and couldn't help but look over curiously. Are you all right? Just now, I felt that you were a little tense. You have never been so nervous when dealing with other famous captains or city-state officials. I don't know what's going on, but when I talk to that young inquisitor, I keep feeling an indescribable pressure. Tyrion did not hide what he had just felt in front of his closest subordinates and heaved a long sigh. This feeling is completely different from when dealing with those city officials in the past, and I never felt this strange pressure even when I brushed by the Death Temple during a cruise. Was there? The subordinate frowned suspiciously. Why didn't I feel it? Although the Inquisitor is indeed a little tall, she does look quite powerful. It's not that type of pressure. Tyrion shook his head. Okay, let's drop this discussion. The power of a saint is extremely strong. She can likely hear you from this distance. When the subordinate heard this, he immediately shut his mouth and nervously glanced around, afraid the lady might pop his head off for the tease. Tyrion didn't say much during the ride, only peering out the car window as the vehicle drove through the streets and showing him the skipping scenery. During their childhood, he and Lucretia had stayed on this pearl of the sea for a brief while. Though that part of his life was already a century ago, he couldn't shirk off the reminiscent emotions swirling inside. Those were some fond memories he could never get back. Chapter 229 Inches Blood Compass. No one else disembarked from the battleship after the famous pirate captain left with his entourage, leaving the Sea Mist moored in the dock like a silent iceberg and overseeing the city-state with its imposing presence. Of the ones to stay behind, First Mate Aiden had been left in charge since he's the most experienced of the crew. Those city-state policemen sure look nervous, muttered a sailor. Are they expecting us to go ashore and plunder? I thought the officials of Planned would be better than the country bumpkins in the north. Aiden didn't look back at his companion. If they don't come forward and maintain order, you will start blabbing about them not daring to come block the road next. Seriously, if they bring out the tanks, will you dare fight them? I'm not going. I don't want to be carried back to the deck in a bucket. The sailor hurriedly shook his head, then glanced up toward where the spiderwalkers had left. The captain left with them. Will he be okay? That tall woman doesn't look easy to mess with. I don't think the captain can beat her. We're not here to fight. We were invited to come here, do you understand? Aiden finally shot a glance at the sailor. And you, can you adjust your mentality? Have you forgotten the captain's usual teachings? We are now the Sea Mist Venture Capital Company. Pirating is not long-lasting, and doing business brings in more money. So when are we going to pirate again? Aiden thought for a while as a ray of sunlight reflected on his shiny bald head. That's obvious, when the opposite side is unwilling to do business. Several undead sailors nodded to that one after the other, indicating that the first mate was well regarded among his peers. Then after several seconds of calm, another sailor with the entire half of his head sunken in muttered, "Can we go ashore and take a look? I heard in Planned you can." "Don't even think about it," Aiden interrupted the subordinate directly. Captain ordered that none is to leave the ship without permission. Crooked dates like you lot will definitely frighten the locals to death if you go ashore. Planned is not the North, few here are acquainted with the living dead and its culture. I get it now, so that's the reason Captain only picked a few guys who looked the most normal. He needed to fit in without causing a commotion, the sailor with half his head missing said resentfully at himself for missing a piece of the body. Actually, I think I will look okay too if I cover my head with a turtle shell and a hat. Ads by PubFuture. Shut up, no one is allowed to go ashore without the captain's order. Aiden glared viciously at the stupid sailor because he could already imagine the mess of disobeying the order. If you really have nothing to do, go to the cabin to see if the few unlucky bastards who were blasted apart are still moving. If they aren't, put them back together. A slight clicking sound suddenly came from nearby, interrupting Aiden's orders. November LBJNN. Everyone on the bridge also heard this slight clicking noise, drawing their attention to search for the sound. Eventually, it was the half-missing head sailor who discovered the source. Next to the captain's seat, a strange machine made up of gears, connecting rods, and compass pointers, had quieted down again. However, the slightly shaky pointers were still moving, indicating it was running just moments before. Did this thing just move? One of the nearest sailors cautiously approached the elaborate machine and stared at its few compass pointers. Aiden also walked over, his gaze falling on the small hemispherical bowl in the center of the machine, where a little bit of dried-up blood remained. The captain last used it to know where the vanished was heading. The bald first mate's brow furrowed a little. As the captain's most trusted confidant, Aiden knows the device well. Anomaly 203, the blood compass, was a brass machine with a complex structure and unknown principles. Once in possession of the Frost Queen, but now the property of Captain Tyrion. This machine should be regarded as an anomaly with a more positive effect. By using the small bowl at the center, the user could fill it with some of the user's blood to activate its homing powers. Of course, the effects only work between the next of kin. Compared to most anomalies that are directly malicious and could be fatal just by improper storage, the blood compass was relatively safe in terms of safekeeping. It does not require any special sealing conditions, but in contrast, this device would show a sinister side once activated. First of all, once injected with blood, the user would be constantly tempted by the compass, generating the urge to continuously inject blood until the user's mental health fractures or they die of blood loss. Secondly, although the blood compass could indeed help the user find their blood relatives, it would often carry bad luck in the process, constantly leading to things of unfortunate nature for those involved. Ads by PubFuture. As far as Aiden knows, Anomaly 203 once guided a father to find his long-lost son, but the ultimate result was the parent and son murdering each other in the encounter. However, these negative effects have always been of little importance to Captain Tyrion. The captain's will was strong enough to resist the blood donation lure of the blood compass, and as for the bad luck tendency incurred during the process. First of all, the captain and Miss Lucretia would never meet during the effective period of Anomaly 203. Second of all, the father and son of the Abnomar family have always been filial and good towards each other. That's right, no matter how cursed and bad luck the blood compass was, it could not create a more disastrous first encounter of blasting each other with firepower from their respective ships. Therefore, Captain Tyrion had often used the blood compass as a sort of warning device to determine whether the vanished had returned to the real world for the past half-century. Aiden and the other sailors gathered around Anomaly 203, their eyes fixed on the brass device's numerous pointers and intricate gears. They've all quieted down now. Maybe it just wanted to move, a sailor with a hole in his head said carefully as if to ease the atmosphere. After all, this thing is usually motionless. Aiden glared at the sailor. Quit joking. If not, we can wipe off the remaining blood in the middle. Another shriveled sailor began, otherwise, I can't keep calm knowing it might wake up at random. No, Aiden shook his head. Captain told me beforehand the blood cannot be removed manually and must be absorbed by the bowl on its own for 72 hours. What happens if you wipe it in advance? No one knows. It's hard enough to summarize the correct use of an anomaly. Who will dare test what happens when you operate it improperly? Aiden shrugs. Or do you want to try? I can consider it your contribution to humanity. Ads by PubFuture. No, forget what I just said. Aiden snorted coldly at the idiot. Click click. At this moment, the gears in the blood compass suddenly started to run again, interrupting the conversation between the sailors. Aiden, the most alarmed, immediately shuddered and stumbled back a step. Nevertheless, the first mate never took his eyes off the compass pointers. He saw it clearly this time. All the arrows pointed at plan for a few seconds before it spun again and went dead. Sharing looks among themselves after the brief silence. I still say this thing just want to move a bit. Shut up, Aiden interrupted the sailor, recalling what exactly happened just now. Although all the pointers had turned away to other spots before dying off completely, they did, for a brief moment, point directly at plan. He's sure of it. It's just that the moment was so short that people might suspect it to be a mere coincidence. But in Aiden's view, it was as if the compass's eyes had just looked at their target and diverted their gaze in a panic to cover up. So why would he think this way? Simple. Aiden had spoken with Tyrion about this blood compass. According to what the captain mentioned, the thing would occasionally portray characteristics of a living creature, just like how a human does. This thing can be scared. Something is wrong. There is something wrong with this city-state. Aiden snapped to attention. We're going to tell the captain about the situation here. But didn't the captain order that we are forbidden to go ashore? We will pass a message first, Aiden said quickly. Go bring Pearly over. The sailor sped away and returned from the bridge area shortly after. The guy had brought over a huge parrot with a colorful tail on his shoulder. The blasted thing was repeatedly grinding its beak shell against the poor man's exposed skull. Pearly, I need you to send a message, Aiden said loudly. The parrot stopped bullying the sailor, raised his head, and stared at the first mate. Pearly can send message. Go to the city-state cathedral. Look for the captain, and tell him, the blood compass points to plan. The city-state is not safe. Chapter 230 Inches Warm Daily Life in the Subspace Lair. The large, colorful-tailed parrot flapped its wings and left the sea mist at astonishing speed, flying towards the middle of the city. First mate, what should we do? Should we wait here? A sailor on the bridge of the sea mist asked after Pearly disappeared from sight. We have no choice but to wait, Aiden said, lowering his head and glancing at the ground under his feet. He quickly weighed his options and said, we can't reduce the number of sailors on the ship, especially after sensing the strange situation in plan. The touch of the crew coming into contact with the city-state could awaken the ship's soul and drive it to madness. Similarly, we cannot let the sea mist send a direct signal to the city or contact the city-state authorities by telegram, as it may alarm the hidden factors hiding within the island. Letting Pearly the parrot pass on the message posed the least risk in this case. However, Aiden hoped that the captain would return soon and wouldn't be trapped or taken by something else. In the worst-case scenario, he would wait a day before sending a crew team ashore. While sitting at the shop counter and flipping through the newspaper, Duncan suddenly stopped and looked up at the window. Mr. Duncan, what are you looking at? Alice noticed the gesture and stopped flipping through her own paper. I thought I sensed something looking in this direction, Duncan said, frowning unsurely. But it's gone now. Oh, I know. This is called the senses of the strong. Mr. Goathead told me about this before, Alice said, excitedly. He said that strong people are instinctively aware of their surroundings. Even a gaze will alarm their instincts if directed at them, so a powerful person like you will constantly get this. Duncan put the newspaper down and looked at Alice blandly. Did he really say that? The smile on Alice's face instantly stiffened. The last sentence was deduced by me. Ads by PubFuture. Don't make useless deductions, Duncan said, then concentrated to begin his search for the source of the stirring. He didn't take that fleeting sensation as an illusion. Having spent so much time in this weird world, he had gotten into the habit of paying attention to any sudden intuition and digging into the bottom of it. Among the many details he obtained was one important piece of information: the southeast port. Tyrion's ship. Duncan was a little surprised after recognizing the source of that aura. Why is he here? He then recalled his previous encounter with the steel battleship, the ship's position at that time, and the intentions shown in the battle. After a short thought, the expression on his face became slightly weird. The sea mist appeared near planned and took the initiative to attack the vanished. Could it be the reinforcements called by the authorities? Are they here to intercept him? Vaguely guessing the cause and effect of the matter in his mind, Duncan only wanted to laugh and cry simultaneously. He didn't know whether he should first lament the relationship between father and son or Tyrion's professionalism as a reinforcement. Despite almost being sunk in the fight, Tyrion still steered the steel behemoth over. What kind of unwavering spirit does he have? This can't be the reason for the sea mist's unsinkable nature, right? Or does he have a superhero tendency to maintain world peace? You're in a daze again, Mr. Duncan. Do you want to go outside? Alice asked. No, Duncan shook his head while maintaining his perception of the sea mist. Since it had not yet become his collection, like the vanished and planned, he could not perceive the details of its contents. But considering his connection with the sea mist and Tyrion, he had begun to search for the location of his eldest son. Alice wouldn't understand these complicated things, so he kept his mouth shut. Instead, he frowned at the doll that was tilting her head. Don't tilt your head will fall off. Alice quickly nodded. Oh, okay. A rustling noise suddenly sounded from the storage room as a petite figure strolled out. Ads by PubFuture. Mr. Duncan. Shirley patted the dust off her skirt and greeted Duncan with an inviting look. The storeroom has been cleaned. All the clutter you pointed to has been packed and organized on the shelf. Well done. Duncan kept some of his attention on the other side of the harbor while turning back and nodding at Shirley. You have a little ash on your shoulder. Oh, Shirley turned her head and patted the dust away before making a slightly nervous face again. Mr. Duncan, what should I do next? When talking to Duncan here, the expression on her face was obviously not as apprehensive as on the vanished, but there was still some obvious nervousness. It seemed that this tension could not be entirely eliminated despite knowing the truth. Nevertheless, it was far better than when they first met. Obviously, from an intellectual level, Shirley knew Duncan treated her kindly and didn't warrant such behavior from herself. The main issue was resolving Dog's nervousness that was bleeding over to Shirley. Duncan nodded and then swept his gaze over to Alice, who was rummaging through the newspaper but didn't actually know a word. Illiterate. He then glanced back at Shirley on the other side. Also illiterate. There was also Dog hidden in the shadows next to her. Although the dark hound had never appeared in the open right now, his aura was becoming more and more impossible to hide. Still illiterate. Sighing inside, Duncan really wondered how fate could be so cruel. He got himself 3 helpers, yet not a single one could read, write, or do the account books. But then, an idea struck him. Specifically, he just remembered his old profession as a teacher. Ads by PubFuture. Come on, all of you sit here. Shirley, you sit to Alice's right. Duncan casually pulled a chair from the side and placed it next to the counter. Dog, you squat behind the counter. Quit hiding, I can see you behind the shadow. Come here, I have an arrangement for all of you. Shirley quickly sat down on the chair obediently, and Alice on the side finally put down the newspaper she couldn't understand. Ah, what arrangement? Well, since Nina hasn't come back from going out to buy things, and I'm free, I'll teach all of you to read, Duncan said, then got up to pat his chest. You can't be illiterate forever. Corrected. Shirley never expected Captain Duncan's serious arrangement to be like this. She was immediately stunned on the spot, while Alice was curious to the point of brightening her purple eyes. As for Dog, he was squatting behind the counter, honestly looking back and forth between Duncan and Shirley, with question marks clearly visible in his skull. But I'm just a dog. Duncan glanced down when he heard this, and before he could say anything, the dark hound had straightened up. But I can try to be a cultured dog. I have the enthusiasm and confidence. That's good, Duncan said in a pleasant tone. Then, while keeping an eye on the port, he reached under the counter and pulled out a few blank notebooks, which he distributed to his students. This will be your alphabet book. Let's start with the most basic letters. Shirley took the book that Duncan handed over with a confused look. Then, she became even more confused. Letters, spelling, a completely incomprehensible new world. After only a few minutes, Shirley confirmed one thing: it's easier to fight Dog and cultists than to learn. But Duncan didn't seem to pay much attention to Shirley's distressed expression, or rather, he was already accustomed to it. On the contrary, he felt only happiness, the joy of suddenly encountering something familiar while wandering in a foreign land. Novelbjn.com. However, this happiness did not last long. Just as Shirley was struggling with the 4th letter, a crisp bell rang, followed by brisk footsteps coming from the front door. Uncle Duncan, I'm back, Nina's cheerful voice sounded at the door. Duncan looked up from his pleasant teaching and saw Nina rushing in, but then he noticed something flying in behind her. I saw I on my way back, Nina said cheerfully, and it seems like I brought a friend. Friend? Duncan frowned slightly and saw I flying into the store after Nina, followed by a large parrot with colorful tail feathers. Duncan,